Max1237, back with another review. Now, not only is this another random first time watch for Hulu, but this might be the first of like a series of videos that I'll do. I don't know if this is going to be a consistent straight marathon or if I'll do some here, some there. But I saw a couple movies recently that I actually forgot that this was a thing. Hulu has an anthology web series where each episode is like a feature-length film. So all the ones on Hulu that has like a Hulu logo is actually part of their Into the Dark show. I've seen Delivered, and I've seen Flesh&Blood, which is going to be this review. I will get to Delivered at some point, but I completely forgot that Hulu had this show, and where all the movies are kind of separate. It's not listed under a show. And I also did not know that the executive producer is Jason Blum. Now, while the credits say Blumhouse Television, I wouldn't really call this a Blumhouse production, this movie or the show as a whole. I will say that the two movies I saw, while not perfect, certainly, definitely not great, but serviceable, both of them were better than the average Blumhouse film. So yeah, this is not going to be for Delivered. This is going to be for Flesh and Blood, which is the second episode. There's been 2 seasons of 12 episodes. And there's other ones that I'll get to, like The Body, Puka Lives, Pure. There's one called Culture Shock, Tentacles, All That We Destroy. There's a bunch on there. Not all of them are on there, I don't think. I think some might have been taken off. But also the theme of these is that each one takes place on or during or uses the backdrop of a certain holiday. And it kind of has a feel like a Masters of Horror type feel, where it's like a feature-length film. Only I don't think it has the clout of having a big-name director attached to it. Even though this one was directed by Patrick Lussier, who directed the 3 Dracula 2000 movies, which are shit. He directed a White Noise sequel. I think he's mostly known for editing films for Wes Craven. But so yeah, I don't know if I'm just gonna do straight Into the Dark films like consistently, or if I'll do some here, some there. But this is the first one, and it's Flesh and Blood, which this takes place during Thanksgiving. Uses Thanksgiving as the backdrop. Yeah, directed by Patrick Lussier, written by Louis Ackerman. Slew of producers, main one being Jason Blum. Michael Wandmacher did the music. And although I will say, at least when I saw it Delivered, it kind of had like the Into the Dark logo looks a lot like the Blumhouse Productions logo. And each one stars a different cast, obviously. I guess there was going to be some connective tissue throughout all of them to kind of create a universe, but I don't know how deep that went. This stars Dermot Mulroney, who I remember him being in a lot of romantic films in the 90s. Diana Silvers, who was the lead in Ma with Octavia Spencer. And Tembi Locke as Dr. Helen Saunders. And the whole thing with this is it's basically like the IFC film Clove Hitch Killer, where a teenager finds out that their father is a serial killer. That's basically the movie. Only this one has a little bit of misery mixed in, like being held captive. Which also, when I saw Delivered, that also had some connotations of being held captive. I don't think all Into the Dark films are that, but the first two I saw were. Only this one does have the interesting aspect of how it's not entirely that she's held captive, even though she is, but she suffers from severe agoraphobia. She makes it as far as the front porch, and she gets panic attacks and dizzy spells. But it does kind of have the pacing of like Clove Hitch Killer, where there's this really close, tight knit father daughter relationship, and then slowly gets these clues that something's not right, and then she just comes to the conclusion that her father's a serial killer. She became agoraphobic, I think, after her mother was murdered around Thanksgiving the prior year. She has her therapy sessions with Dr. Saunders at her house. And this movie doesn't have a whole lot of story. I mean, this probably could have been done as... It definitely works as an anthology story, where it's like a quick one and done. But I feel like it could have been something maybe like an hour long, or even something shorter, like say a Tales from the Crypt episode, even though it doesn't have a twist. But an hour 20 something minutes was definitely longer than it needed to be, only because the story is so thin. It really is just about this teenager finding out her father's a serial killer. And it all starts out when, her birthday, I think, is the day before Thanksgiving. He gets her a necklace, and it shows the latest girl to go missing wearing the same one. He's always having to go out, and, he's out for odd hours. And then he goes straight up to the attic for a bit. She finds a little tackle box, or like a crafts box, full of pieces of jewelry. Those are all his trophies. Which, I'm not mistaken, I think Clove Hitch Killer was driver's licenses. But while Clove Hitch Killer had the interesting story of one being very much heavily, strongly modeled after the BTK, so much so that it actually feels like a BTK movie. That's how close they got it. But the fact that the Clove Hitch Killer had been out of commission for some years, still has the community gripped in fear, then kind of comes out of retirement as the son is figuring this out. In this, the killer doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a moniker, still active, but finds the trophies and starts to put it together that, oh, you're the one that's killed all these girls, you probably killed Mom. Yes. And I can't really go into spoilers because this movie, one, because there really isn't any spoilers. It plays out exactly as you would expect it to. It is very predictable because of that. But also, it feels like this movie wants to keep you guessing, kind of like Clove Hitch kind of did. But it doesn't do a good job at trying to keep you, no pun intended, in the dark about it. You pretty much, and you kind of figure it out faster than the character does, because every little clue is just like, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious. So he has trophies or jewelry. Dermot Mulroney as the father. He does do a good performance, I will say. I'm not going to try to label a diagnosis for him. I'm not an armchair psychologist. A lot of people will watch these movies, see how they behave, and they'll be like, well, that is textbook sociopathy, and because he's something obvious. But he does do a good job playing like this master manipulator type character with a very manic episodes. He gets very angry and, aggressive, but then he kind of pulls back. He's like, you see, honey, that's exactly what this is. Misunderstand it. He does do a good job, even though he does ham it up quite a bit, especially as the film goes on. He gets bigger and hammier. But Silvers as the daughter does do a good job. And the only real interesting aspect that it has is the fact that she is suffering from agoraphobia. So even though at one point she is locked up in her bedroom, or at one point even zip tied uh, in place, there is a point where she does make it outside, but the dad just kind of stands there and watches because he knows that she's gonna, you know, have an attack. But it doesn't really explore that very much. There's a couple times where she tries to get outside but suffers the attack. It doesn't really have this. Yeah, I feel like there could have been more to that. Which, spoiler alert, yes, having to go outside is what saves her life. But there are, and it does have several times, like when the cops are called, and he makes her come up with a story for, oh, it was a misunderstanding, or when her therapist comes over and he has to sit in. There are some cool moments of how she outsmarts him, even giving him, pun intended, a taste of his own medicine. If you've seen it, then you know what I mean. But this movie it is very predictable, but I guess it would really only work if you like those kinds of stories, like a killer in the family or something like that. And like Clove Hitch, we don't actually see the dad committing these crimes. It is kind of playing off the what if aspect, kind of like the mystery, even though the mystery is probably one of the weaker points of the film. It does have a very limited cast and setting. In fact, I don't think there's any scenes of outside the house or the property. I mean, we see like the front of the property, but I think just with the cops in the car driving around is the only scene we get outside the house. There is some CGI burn effects that work. They're not terrible. Actually, kind of effective, which baffles me. Huge budget Hollywood films fuck up CGI all the time, but this Hulu TV web series that has just someone being burnt has a pretty good effect. So, and yeah, the performance of the dad does get very hammy, but if you take it as just someone who's going crazy, it works. Some of the only real suspenseful scene that I thought worked was when she goes through the attic and tries to climb down this portion of the house that goes straight to the crawl space. There's like a hole in the wall because he's doing renovations. She's trying to be quiet as he's around. That's really the only big suspenseful scene that works. But there is a good setup with a hole in her bedroom ceiling going into the attic that does pay off at the end. And it doesn't really go a whole lot into the kind of killer he is, or, I mean, the dead giveaway that really kills the mystery, and it is very early on, is when he comes home and an earring falls out of his pocket, and he goes crazy when she finds it and won't give it back. So, I mean, it's interesting enough, even though the most interesting aspect is the agoraphobia, even though they might not do a whole lot with it. But, you know, if you like these kinds of stories, like Clove Hitch Killer or A Good Marriage, which is also inspired by BTK, even though it's not a very good movie, stuff like that, then I think it'll work. The performances work for what it is, but it really does have a formula, which is she finds a clue, confronts him, he calms her down, sort of, finds more stuff, confronts him, tries to reach out, he has her fix it. keeps her cooped up. She finds a way out. He gets her, and it does kind of repeat itself throughout. I do feel like this would have worked better if it was like an hour anthology, or even like an anthology horror film. Something. Find something modern. Something like a Trick or Treat, even though it's not Halloween, but just a few short segments. Maybe a half hour's a little too short, but an hour definitely. This didn't need 80 something minutes to tell this story. It did kind of drag it out at some points, but if and actually the first one I watched was Delivered, which was okay. I did like this one more, but if these two are sort of a sign of things to come, I think this will be a good series of reviews. I will create an Into the Dark playlist, which is probably going to have more positive reviews than my actual Blumhouse Productions playlist. Because again, even though Jason Blum is a producer of this, and it does say Blumhouse Television, I don't know if it's like an official Blumhouse production. But, so yeah, this is the first of my reviews for Hulu's Into the Dark. I will get to ones like The Body, Puka Lives, Pure. There's a bunch on there. I will review Delivered at some point. But there's a few other films that I've seen that I haven't reviewed yet, like No Exit, which I think is a Hulu original. Hunter x Hunter, which is an IFC film. The Free Fall, which I saw a while ago and I never reviewed. Safer at Home, which I saw twice now and I still haven't reviewed it. But I'm gonna look more into this Into the Dark series and see what it has to offer. But yeah, that is episode 2 of Hulu's Into the Dark, Flesh and Blood. Not bad, but not great. Thank you for watching.